So
Yeah.
how would this court system work differently than the one we have?
It would just be a specialized court, just like the bankruptcy courts and tax courts and admiralty courts and so forth. It would, it would excuse me. It would say the internet is becoming literally the domain of global civilization. It's becoming the agora, the meeting place of society on many, many levels. So it would say that the things that go on the internet are so ubiquitous and so dominant that it's difficult for a person who's active on the internet to really even police the internet. So, for example, I'm very active on the internet. I utilize it in my law practice. I use it to communicate personally. I founded and maintain a number of groups, actively maintain a number of groups on Facebook. I'm going to clean up Twitter and get my own actual name on Twitter and start tweeting in my campaign and so forth. And what I found being online is it's difficult for the individual to interact with the internet or be featured on the internet and really preserve his or her legal rights. I mean, because it's there's so much content that virtually everybody during their career on the internet is subject to defamation of character, copyright infringement, false light publicity, stalking, and so forth. So I would just, in the interest of judicial economy, I would simply say, let's found an internet court that only deals with internet matters. And as a federal court system, those magistrates could also specialize on issuing the warrants for government searches of people online, because that's another area where you could potentially have your rights infringed if, let's say, your email traffic is being eavesdropped by the National Security Agency. I don't think that any of our alphabet intelligence agencies or criminal prosecutorial or regulatory agencies should necessarily be denied the capacity to surveil somebody online if they are enforcing the criminal code or the administrative code. I just think that we should comport with the Bill of Rights under the Fourth Amendment and make those warranted searches. In other words, a lawful magistrate should issue a warrant to permit the infringement of that person's privacy. Okay, so I would do everything from have that court do that, issue the warrants to do surreptitious searches of people's internet traffic, but also protect the rights of individual Americans and consumers by, it would be the place where you would file a standard form for defamation and the court would shut down the defamatory content. In other words, see, the problem is the internet emerged as a Defense Department communications network, and then it emerged in a highly privatized commercial context, and essentially it's the Wild Wild West. It's a place where regularly people get defamed. For example, I'm a public figure, but I'm also an attorney at law privately and a human being. And right now, an individual named Tory Smith is falsely alleging in a YouTube that I have raped and killed 111 children. I mean, that's so ridiculous. It's asinine, yes, and most people won't believe it. But some people will, and I will be actively defamed. I'll even be defamed subtly, even among the people who don't believe that wild, impossible claim, because it just leaves the odor of a crime involving moral turpitude. Now, I've lived a Christic life. I've lived a good life where I've done right by other people. I was raised that way. So I've never harmed anybody else, and I've never violated the criminal code. And yet here I'm being accused of a mass atrocity. That's possible because I'm so busy and the internet is so active that it's impossible to just simply police defamation of character. What am I supposed to do? Sue everybody who makes a false allegation like that against me? I couldn't even get the FBI to investigate and shut down 7 people who were stalking me at the same time in 2011. Red, I was being stalked physically by 7 people. Well, at least I was being stalked remotely by 7 people. And one of those persons moved from Sacramento to Portland, Oregon to physically stalk me. And when I contacted the FBI, All they did is put me in touch with an FBI webpage about how to file a claim with the government in the event of economic fraud online. It was complete non sequitur. They didn't say, well, sir, you have a right not to be stalked online or physically stalked by somebody using the internet to try to communicate with you, to try to find out where you live. They didn't do anything for me. So what I would do is I would have a board of internet scholars work with the Justice Department, the U.S. Justice Department, in determining everything that's going on online that is criminal or tortious. And then a set of standard forms would be evolved so everybody could file regarding that conduct. And then that would be a way of policing the internet so that the public is protected, but also individuals are protected.
I mean,
because there's defamation, copyright infringement, stalking.
That would definitely be a pretty heavy bureaucratic load, huh?
It would, but because the internet is now the commonplace, I'll use the Greek term agora. It's the marketplace where people go and gab. It's the most common arena of social intercourse and discourse, of communication and contact.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be made consistent with the notion of a good society, and it isn't. It's a cesspool of defamation, stalking, criminal activity, in terms of marketing things illegally, false light publicity, copyright infringement. I mean, look at a website like Scribd. They regularly take people's books and publish them without permission.
Mm-hmm.
Why haven't they been shut down by the government? That's mass copyright infringement. But we've accepted a lot of garbage. We've accepted a lot of diminishment of the legal standards that protect us from stalking, that protect us from copyright infringement, that protect us from defamation of character, and the other things that are going on online every day because of basically sort of the technological surprise of the technology. It's like Einstein said that the problem with the nuclear arms race was that nuclear weapons had emerged before we developed a social organization to cope with them, and therefore we were in danger of mass annihilation. I think there's an analogy with the internet. The internet emerged so quickly and in such a pervasive way that we haven't made it a good domain of society. It's a lawless domain. And I would make it lawful by evolving an internet court in which a person could literally download and make, under penalty of perjury, make a discrete legal claim by just filling out the form and scanning it and sending it back to the internet court. And something like Tory Smith's totally bogus claim that I've killed 111 people would be taken down immediately, as per a government warrant. I mean, if he was in downtown New York City and shouting, Andrew DiBusciago has murdered 111 children after raping them, he could be arrested. I could have him arrested for criminal endangerment of me by people who might respond to that information and seek to kill me. Okay, so this is what we haven't done. And because the internet is such a cash cow, and because the potential to defame politicians is so rife on the internet, our government has avoided doing this, and it's been irresponsible. Every time regulation of the internet is suggested, there's this false claim made that the government is either going to tax or shut down the internet. What about policing it so that it's a good domain of society? Just like newspapers were disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
We moved away from yellow journalism as a society when we began enforcing the defamation laws, the libel laws. We're not even policing slander per se. In my home jurisdiction, the state of Washington, there are 4 forms of slander per se. And slander per se is where you don't have to prove damages to get damages. It's a strict liability kind of tort where just as a result of saying something, it's viewed to be inherently damaging and you can get monetary damages. And that's where the person alleges that you've committed a crime involving moral turpitude, you have a loathsome disease, the unchasteness of an unmarried woman. That's still on the books. In business or professional incompetence. Okay, so in In Washington, you can just sue, and without even proving damages, you can get monetary damages if you can prove the fact pattern that the person said one of those things about you and it was false. Okay, if you have a loathsome disease like leprosy, you can't recover because it was true, and that's a defense to defamation because it obviates one of the necessary elements of defamation, that the statement be false. Okay, now we allow that in conventional contexts in the state of Washington, but we're not even. That just fell off. Yeah. We're not policing the internet by providing an effective way, in a convenient way, for somebody like me, vis-a-vis Tory Smith, to shut him down, to get an injunction, to have the content immediately removed. I mean, it's obvious that a 54-year-old lawyer who's never been arrested, I was only questioned by police once, and that was because somebody had filed a false claim against me. Okay, so I've never been arrested, I've never been charged, I've never been tried, and I've never been convicted of a crime. I'm 54. Okay, I'm going to be 55 in September in half a year. And this jerk is accusing me of 111 accounts. 111 counts of child rape and murder. I mean, where does it stop? It stops by the creation of an internet court where people have redress to immediately shut this kind of garbage down. Why don't we have that? The people haven't demanded it, and they should be. So as their president, I would introduce legislation to create an internet court for all internet-related actions. That way we steer everything that's related to online activity towards a court that can develop expertise in that area of the law.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're suing for copyright infringement. Hold on, let me get a drink. I've got a scratchy throat this morning.
Yeah, take your time.
Let's say you sue. Are you there?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, right. Let's say you sue under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act for an act of copyright infringement online, which carries statutory damages of $80,000. If we had an internet court, people pursuing copyright infringement actions under that act would be going before a court that practices that area of law all day long. So you wouldn't have to create a textual or a verbal argument before a federal district court judge or magistrate. You would go in front of basically a specialized court, and that judge would know right away whether you had a legitimate claim. If we had people being sued $80,000, even if there weren't recoveries, but $80,000 for every act of copyright infringement, people would be behaving the proper way, and that is not being engaged in copyright infringement online. But like I said, there are even entire websites like Scribd, SCRIBD, that regularly practice that.
Mm.
So that would be one of the benefits of an internet court, is that the judges on it and the lawyers practicing in front of it would be doing internet law all day long. In fact, after leaving the presidency, if I'm elected, I would practice that. I find that stuff fascinating. Internet law is a fascinating emergent area of the law. So there would be no shortage of lawyers who would want to practice before that court. But that would be one of the main benefits. It would become a specialized court with specialized practitioners who would really know the law.
Mm-hmm.
And be able to give swift justice in, for example, enjoining and penalizing illegal conduct online.
So I have a few more questions about technology, but I think it's best if we circle back to it after we talk about first. I mean, we've got to cover time travel, and aliens, of course. So
okay,
I specifically want to talk about your moonshot proposal with time travel, but we have to cover the basics of that in the first place. So, I mean, I know this is a long story, and it's been the focus of your previous press.
Right.
So if you could just give us the bullet points of what what you mean when you're talking about. So the first part is government disclosure of secret advanced technologies, particularly time travel. Like, what are these technologies being kept secret? Why?
Okay, I entered public life as a whistleblower. I began lecturing in 2004 about my childhood experiences in DARPA's Project Pegasus. DARPA had a program that was basically an intelligence funnel that was into which they were putting anything that would allow the U.S. government to derive a time travel capability. I think I mentioned yesterday that they were worried about the extraterrestrials that began visiting us with greater frequency after the advent of the atomic age, basically after 1944. What the former Soviet Union might do, its military, and now there's better evidence that there was a surviving Nazi contingent on Antarctica, and that's not folklore, but was actually something that the U.S. government was responding to. My father was brought into the response to whatever was above, whether they were Nazis or ETs, piloting those craft above Washington, D.C. in July of 1952, which was an alleged ET overflight. We now think it may have been Nazis demonstrating their technology, but that created an emergency within the United States government that President Eisenhower inherited when he was sworn in from Truman. And because those craft, and this is a matter of public record, that incident was reported on the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times in early July of '52. Those craft, or whatever they were piloted by. Huh?
Is that available online? The front page.
Probably, yeah, probably. That was July 1952. So those are famous front pages. And so, despite the giggle factor that TV news perpetuated for the next 50 years about ETs, whatever was piloting those crafts, whether it was a secret society, whether it was a surviving contingent of Nazis, whether they were extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials from within the Earth or wherever, it's undisputed that they were doing things that were then not within the technical capability of the United States government. And my dad knew that because after that event, he was brought in to design the metal alloy by which the ramjet planes would be built so that the fuselage and engines and so forth wouldn't melt when the ramjet, from friction with air molecules inside our atmosphere and friction or contact with space particles of space dust when the ramjet went outside our atmosphere. So my father was not an expert, but he was certainly an informed party about the fact that events like the July 1952 overflight of Washington involved technology that we had to catch up to, wherever it was coming from, off-planet, Soviet Union, surviving Nazis, whatever. Okay. It even could have been a secret society within this country.
What was your dad's position?
Say again?
What was your dad's position?
My dad was an electrical engineer who worked for a set of defense contractors. In 52 to 55, he was on the design team for the ramjet at Curtiss-Wright Aeronautical Company in Woodridge, New Jersey. He designed the metal alloy, or his team designed the metal alloy by which the ramjet would be built. He actually synthesized what alloy wouldn't melt. Okay, so from that point on, from the early 50s on, my dad was frequently attached to the aerospace projects that involved catching up with whatever faction had the superior technology. Presumably the extraterrestrials did because they were here from interstellar space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's, Michael Sala's new book, Dr. Michael Sala, Salla, pretty much establishes that there was a surviving Nazi contingent in Antarctica, and they had superior aircraft. Okay, so my dad spent his whole career in that realm, and sometime during his time when he was employed at the Thomas A. Edison Research Laboratory. That wasn't the historical Edison Labs in West Orange. It was actually located in a set of offices that was physically adjacent to the historical Edison Lab. In fact, it was only separated by the historical Edison Labs by one door. But anyway, it was a think tank begun in 1950. My dad was hired there in 1956. He worked there till 1964. And as later described to me, in the presence of a Ralph M. Parsons Company engineer named Ray Kubik, who was my father's friend and supervisor at a number of these companies. My father was asked by the government to repeat Nikola Tesla's teleportation experiments when he was at the Edison labs. So one day when we were playing upper pool at our house in New Jersey in 71, he described how he was magnetizing cylinders in the way that Tesla had been. And then he was dropping an object through the cylinder, like a penny, a billiard chalk. And the object was coming out the other end either too fast, too slow, or not at all. And in fact, when I appeared on Coast to Coast and described this, somebody who grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, described how in 1956 he found a 1958 penny in the street, on the street in Montclair, New Jersey. And I wrote him back by email. I said, geez, that might have been one of the pennies that my dad dropped through one of the Tesla cylinders. Okay, so my dad basically, by the time that the Edison labs closed in 1964, he was an expert on Tesla teleportation. When the Edison labs closed, he was so angry that when he was telling our neighbors at a 4th of July picnic in 1964 or 5 that they were on the verge of achieving time travel at the Edison labs, he actually became volubly angry when our neighbors were kind of scoffing at what he was saying. They were, employed by corporation or companies like Bell Labs and so forth. And my mother later said, after my father's death, that he was so angry at the closing of the Edison labs, he wanted to go back and bomb the place. He wouldn't have done that. He had 5 kids. He was a peaceable man, but he was just volubly angry because they were on the threshold of achieving time travel. Sometime between 1964, when the Edison labs closed, and when my dad, he spent about a year at CF Braun, and then he was employed again for the first time by Ralph M. Parsons in 1966, when he was hired by a subsidiary of Parsons called Parsons Jordan Corporation, which publicly had one contract, which was the Anaconda copper contract in Chile, Anaconda being the huge Chilean copper producer. And in fact, mining sites like the Anaconda sites were being used to mask what my father was really being brought into, which was, in addition to helping Anaconda with its copper smelters, secretly they were cobbling together Project Pegasus, a time-space program, because the Los Alamos National Labs, whose director would be Harold Agnew by 1970, had Nikola Tesla's papers from 1945-45 forward, 44-45 forward, because 2 War Department officials beat 2 FBI agents to seize Tesla's paperwork upon his death at the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan on January 7th of 1943. So my father had repeated some of those experiments at the Edison labs, and he got picked up by Parsons when Parsons got the time-space contract. The Ralph M. Parsons Company, by 1970, would literally give the United States government time travel. The 2 principal technologies were the Tesla teleporter, which opens up a vortal tunnel in the fabric of time-space through which the teleportee physically passes, namely the opposite of the quantum teleportation that was then, by 1966-67 was appearing on Star Trek on American television. The other principal device are devices called chronovisors. And what chronovision does is it propagates a hologram so dense, a field of light that is so dense, by driving an electromagnetic signal through an 8-sided bismuth crystal, that the hologram has a lensing effect by where the light patterns of non-local events, what we would call past or future events, or events going on in other dimensions, are lensed into the laboratory. When they experimented and they had somebody stand in the hologram, they found that that person subjectively experienced temporarily going to that non-local event. And I was involved in both of those activities extensively when I was in Project Pegasus. The other technology, primary technology, was the Montauk chair, which is a chair that you sit in that has a solenoid on the back of the chair behind your solar plexus, and it basically uses magnetic transduction to accentuate your basic psychic ability, basically the part of the brain that focuses on where you are in time-space. and that's used to bump the person forward in time, so they have a kind of astral projection of an event in their own future. That's all that the Montauk chair does. So I was involved in literally dozens of activities with each of those three technologies. I probably took 50 to 100, we call them rides or probes in the Montauk chair to my own future. I jumped through the Tesla devices at Curtiss Wright in Woodridge, New Jersey, and at the Sandia National Lab in Sandia, New Mexico, probably 100 times during that 3.5-year period when I was active. And then I was immersed in dozens of holograms of past events and a few holograms of future events. Okay, so now the import of this is that unbeknownst to the public, the global public, and most definitely the American people, while apocryphal stories have come out, some of them true, about things like the Philadelphia experiment, it was concealed from the American people that our great American civilization achieved something very mighty by 1970, which was different forms of time travel. And the physicists who would comment intelligently upon that conjecture, that proposition, have not been commenting authoritatively because they don't have access to the technology and never did. That would be Michio Kaku, Ronald Mallet in the United States, and then Stephen Hawking and David Deutsch in the United Kingdom. I know, however, and in fact I confronted Michio Kaku about the fact that I was a teleportee, and he snapped his back to me. He turned his back on me in the early 80s when I approached him at a speaking event of his in West Los Angeles when I was a student at UCLA. Okay, so I know the truth because I was in it. I will go to my grave, and I will never capitulate, and I will never stop talking about what Project Pegasus accomplished because I was in it. I know what we did. And when in adulthood, when I investigated my experiences, having never forgotten them, I proved the existence of the project, and I even had a presidential briefing about the existence of the project and the technologies. Now, am I advocating, just to kind of cut to the chase and kind of end this anecdote, am I advocating that we should introduce mass time travel by mass people? No. That would lead to mass chaos because people would be operating on mass timelines. And just the flight of capital to Microsoft right before it became an initial public offering would cause social disruption. So I'm not advocating the mass access to time travel.
I'm sorry, I got lost with the Microsoft.
Say again?
I got lost at Microsoft. You're saying, like, as an example, Microsoft?
As an example, if people alive today who saw Microsoft and Apple and the other digital blue chips
I see.
Double and triple and split and then double again and split again and basically go up by orders and orders of magnitudes in the last 30 years since they were IPOs, initial public offerings. If people had access to time travel, they could go back and buy those stocks when they were initial public offerings. And if enough people were time traveling, you could have a huge flight of capital to those corporations. So, Bill Gates could have cashed out with the flight of capital to his stock before even developing, an adequate version of Word and making the social contribution for which he was mightily rewarded monetarily. Okay, so it would be disruptive to allow the mass public to time travel because a significant plurality of people would get involved in going back to do things like invest in later successful stocks from public stocks of successful companies. And they would do other things. They would consider getting divorced before they met the person that they fell in love and get married with. Because if they found out, let's say a guy who was richer than his wife, or he was employed and she was a housewife, if he found out that his marriage was only going to last 5 years and he was going to be taken to the cleaners in the divorce decree, then he might not even fall in love with that woman upon meeting her. He may go, oh, she's the woman I marry and then am destituted by,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So my point is, you can't introduce mass time travel because it would completely screw up society. We would all be mad hatters because we would be dealing with crises in our lives that were actually propagated by people traveling back in time to manipulate events. Okay, so that's not what I'm advocating. What I'm advocating I'm advocating the disclosure of the technologies in the sense that the public would be informed of what the U.S. government has done. But in terms of mass social application of technology, I'm only calling for introduction of Tesla teleportation for real-time transport. So if you were in London and you had to fly to Sydney, Australia, you could get there in seconds rather than in 24 hours on a commercial passenger plane. I also think that maybe the Montauk chair is something that could be used in psychiatry and maybe give somebody, three 15-minute Montauk chair rides to their future every 5 years or something like that.
Now, what would the benefit of that be?
That would be like, let's say somebody is suffering from a unipolar depression after losing a child. If they could virtually or vicariously visit their future and see that the wife got pregnant again and she had a beautiful child and was happy again, the Montauk chair could be used in psychotherapy, for example, to lift people out of depression. A lot of depression, if somebody's not bipolar, if they just have unipolar depression, a lot of it is for unaddressed emotional pain or anger that doesn't get treated and manifests as depression. So if you could lift somebody's spirit by showing them that the future is going to be a lot better than the present, you would save a lot of people from suicide and from chronic depression. Okay, depression's more complex than that. There's known biomedical factors as well, certainly cofactors. But the Montauk chair could be used, in other words, as a form of psychotherapy to give people a sense of some of the exciting things that were going to happen in their life in the future. Because the Montauk chair bumps you forward to a little 15 or 20-minute episode where you're literally living your life in the future. In other words, you're in your own shoes. It basically allows you to presage an actual personal event and not just see it, but experience it. And then you can come back and interpret what you saw, what you lived in that astral projection. So I would favor maybe partial introduction of that. And I'm also calling for limited access to chronovision. We don't want to, just like with teleportation, with time travel-based teleportation, we don't want to introduce chronovision just willy-nilly because it could be used to violate people's privacy. It could also be used, by the way, to violate the privacy of people in the past and future. And why should the United States government be involved in allowing people in society to look back in time, for example, or use chronovision in real time, for example, to invade people's sex lives and, create basically a pirated form of pornography? Okay, so we have to put government controls on private use of chronovision, or otherwise privacy will go by the wayside. But what I am calling for in the area of chronovision is that a public-private partnership at the federal level would produce chronovized scenes of auspicious moments in the past or educative moments in the past. So you could travel to a tenement in New York City in 1850 and see how horrible the conditions were for the poor in New York City. You could watch, you could go to the National Archives and watch a hologrammatic movie of George Washington in his Masonic apron laying the cornerstone of the Capitol on September 18th, 1793. I mean, really things that we have really no conception of. And then obviously the classic ones like, watch Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, etc. All that has been possible since 1970. The Smithsonian Institution could have already been dealing on a quantum level for the past 46 years and has not been. So we're several generations behind intelligent implementation of these technologies. And I want to be the president who rolls out the technologies because I was involved as a kid in their development. That's my destiny. That's my life's work.
So I want to go back just to get the timeline more clear. So
okay.
Your father worked at the Thomas A. Edison lab, and he was working on it, and it was close. He was close to time travel, and the lab was shut down, and he was very angry about this, and the lab's technology was moved to a clandestine operation in, what did you say, Colombia?
No. I was just making the point that Parsons Jordan, where he went to work in 1966, was a mining concern. And I found out in my investigation, and also when I went back and I viewed my experiences, that they were using mining sites both in the country and outside the country to secret some of the technologies. So it's not accidental that Parsons Jordan had one public contract that it talked about, which was the Anaconda Chile copper contract. But no, what happened was sometime in the midst, really the key thing in this area is that sometime around 1965-66, a group of people inside the U.S. government and the engineering community, the defense community, the defense contractors, said, wait a minute, let's cobble all these time travel related technologies together and launch a secret program under DARPA. The principal company involved in that contract was Parsons, which then was known as the Ralph M. Parsons Company.
And your father did or did not work there?
My father did. He worked there from 1966 to 84, and then he retired.
Okay, after the Thomas Edison Labs, he went there.
No,
after a brief period.
In 64, and then he worked for C.F. Braun, or one of the other engineering firms in New Jersey. But then he went to work 2 years after leaving the Edison Labs and being disgusted that they had shut the Edison Labs down at the time that they were on the threshold of achieving time travel. My dad then gets picked up by Parsons in 66, and by the time he's employed by the Ralph M. Parsons Company per se, in winter of 1968, I'm teleporting with him. So, and also when I went to Gettysburg, when he was there, he was like 4 or 5 years younger. So we can date the time that my dad began time traveling to like the mid-1960s. I was brought into the project by teleporting with him in 1968 when I was a 6-year-old. Okay, so that's sort of the timeline is, he graduates from Lehigh with a BS in electrical engineering in 1951. He does half of his degree program in electrical engineering, a quarter in physics and a quarter in mathematics. And he works for Okanite and Curtis Wright in 51 and 52 to 55. He's at Curtis Wright after leaving Okanite. And then in 56 to 64, he works on a number of things at the Edison Labs, including repeating Nikola Tesla's teleportation experiments. And then he's disgusted when the Edison Labs closed. And yet by 66, he's employed by Parsons, which based on my experiences and his, there's no question that Parsons was the defense contractor that had the Project Pegasus contract, the secret time-space exploration contract. Mm. In fact, my father and I were invited to the christening of the Pegasus II when Ralph Parsons bought what was then the world's largest private yacht from the Iranian businessman Adnan Khashoggi, and it was christened in Long Beach Harbor in 1972. So Parsons became so rich from Project Pegasus that he named the world's largest yacht after the program, Pegasus II. And up until I started speaking out publicly, that fact was actually on the Parsons website. Okay, so by the mid-60s, something is stirring within the American government. People like my father, Harold Agnew, who was one of the principal Manhattan Project physicists, and obviously people at Parsons before my dad got there, had determined that the United States should really now begin to focus on creating a time-space capability, because going all the way back to 1952, we saw what those devices had done above Washington, D.C. One thing they were doing was suddenly blinking out and then blinking back on again in some other location above the Capitol. So they were aware that whoever was responsible for those devices, presumably extraterrestrials or interdimensionals, they had mastered teleportation. So it was determined that we had to. But then when it was determined that we should have a teleportation capability, probably under the guidance of people like Agnew, who was a very intelligent man, they decided to create a broadly based time-space program to include other technologies, including chronovision, including the Montauk chair.
And what I keep getting a little lost in the timeline. So this is late 60s?
Yeah, Pegasus is fully operational by 68 because that's when I first teleported with my dad. And so since Parsons was proved out over time to be the principal, virtually the major, or not, I would say the primary defense contractor involved in giving the United States government a time-space capability, since my father went to work there at Parsons Jordan Corporation in 1966, a subsidiary of Ralph M. Parsons, that 1966-67 timeframe is when Project Pegasus would have been initiated, because I then teleport with my dad in winter of 1968. So in 66-67, the program actually had to begin. And we know that what he had been doing at the Edison Labs, but there was that 2-year gap between the Edison Labs and Parsons. So sometime during that gap, but no later than 66-67, within the U.S. government, there had been a decision made to create a time-space program. And that's what my father got picked up in, because he had repeated Tesla's experiments back at the Edison Labs from 56 to 64. And as a result, he became the chief technical consultant between Parsons and the CIA on the theory and practice of Tesla teleportation.
Is it all right if we take a 5-minute break?
Sure, I'm having a tickle too, so that would help me. So yeah, you just call me when I'll just make my bed here and do stuff, and just call me when it's convenient. I'll keep the phone on.
Yeah, I'm just gonna hit the restroom. I'll be back in 5-10 minutes.
Okay, sounds great.
Thanks.
Okay, bye bye.